This video explains what to expect in the Physics 1100 labs this semester. I'll be going over some lab policies and general information, and I'll also explain a little bit about how the labs work in terms of what you hand in when. Now, chances are good that you're already on the Moodle website for the course and clicked into this first Lab 1 section. In fact, you're probably watching this video right here. So I'm going to go over some policies, and those are posted for you here in the first section. So just so you know, we have a lab schedule posted here, 2 handouts, and the full lab manual. So I'm going to open up this first handout, which covers lab policies and general information. So first of all, hi, I'm Jennifer. You can call me Jen, Jennifer, Ms. de Benedictis. It's really not an issue to me. Email is the best way to get in touch with me. I have given you my office phone number too, but I work on both campuses, so it's not always easy to find me in my office. Email is a better way. And by the way, don't ever leave me voicemail at this number because I'll never, ever get it. So email is the best way to get in touch with me. The labs are due at the end of the 2-hour lab period, and especially when there are back-to-back labs, your lab instructor has to be strict about kicking you out on time. So you only get the 2 hours. As I mentioned before, there is a schedule that gets posted on the lab room door. The labs mostly run in numerical order, but not always. So just heading back to the Moodle site for a moment. As I said, I've posted the lab schedule here. You don't necessarily really need this because I've already organized all of these click to open sections for the labs in the right order. So as long as you click the one for the next week down, you'll always wind up preparing for the right experiment. So as I said, you don't really need to look at the schedule. You can just look at the Moodle site here. Going back to my handout. Now this course has been set up to be paperless this semester, which means that rather than having you buy a paper copy of the lab manual at the bookstore, we're instead going to give you electronic copies of all the experiments. And you'll fill those in electronically and hand them in electronically, and then they'll be graded and handed back to you electronically. So you don't need a separate lab book or lab manual for this course this semester. You'll be provided with files instead. You will be working in a lab group of ideally 3 students, or a couple of groups of 2 students if we don't have the right number of students to get perfect groups of 3. And you're going to work together with your partners to fill in one lab write-up, and then you hand in that one file, and all 3 of you will get the same grade. You are going to be assigning yourselves certain roles within the group, and I'll discuss this more later. But everybody in the group has a certain job that they do, and then every week you'll cycle the roles so that you're doing a different job that week. Like I said, I'll discuss this more in a bit. The labs count for 25% of your course grade, and there is a lab exam. That's Lab 8. It happens in the middle of the semester, and no, we don't have a second lab exam that happens at the end of the semester. There's only the one lab exam, Lab 8, that happens mid-semester. The pre-labs are a set of questions that you have to complete before the lab starts. So these are set up to be Moodle quizzes. So you'll do your Moodle quiz for your pre-lab, and it's due by the beginning of the lab period. You get graded individually on your pre-lab, so if you forget to do it, you lose the marks for that, but your partners in your lab group do not. Exemptions. So if you've taken this course before and you got a grade of 70% in the labs and passed the lab exam, then you may qualify for what's called an exemption, which would mean that you wouldn't need to do the labs again this semester. I could just submit the lab grade that you got last time for this semester also. However, this is something that you have to set up with me in person. It doesn't happen automatically. So if you think you qualify for a lab exemption, get in touch with me to ask about it. The late arrival policy is just that if your partners have already started working, you have to work by yourself that week, even if they'd be okay with you joining them. I won't allow you to because it's not fair to them. So if you show up late, you have to work on your own. If there's not enough space for you to work on your own that week, then you may need to complete the lab either in another lab period or as a makeup lab. But generally speaking, that's the only penalty for arriving late, is you have to work by yourself that week. Now, the missed lab policy is a lot more strict, so I want to be very clear about this. The labs are considered part of the course requirements. You have to do them all to pass the course. So I just want to be really clear about that. If you ditch a lab, you fail the whole course. So if you miss a lab for a valid reason, like you were sick, you will need to do a makeup lab. Get in touch with me as soon as you know that you're not going to make it to the lab. Ideally, email me that same day. The default is that you do need to provide me with a doctor's note, but generally speaking, if it's the first time you missed a lab, I won't require that. However, that's something I'll tell you. So if you wake up and you're too sick to come to school, email me to tell me that you're not going to make it, and I'll email back to say whether or not I want you to get me a doctor's note. So going down to the next page, I've given you a little map of the Spruce building, which is where our lab is located. So this is our lab room. When you're coming into the Spruce building, you're likely either coming in from the parking lot using this entrance, or you're coming in from the Fir building along this diagonal hallway that connects the two buildings. So you come to the atrium, and then you want to head up this little hallway to the south, around the corner, and this is our lab room. My office is one of these two rooms at the back. Usually it's this one. That office does have a door onto the hallway, so you can actually look through my office door to check whether or not I'm there. And because it's useful information, if you head back towards the Fir building, there's a men's and a women's washrooms here, or you can head back more towards the parking lot entrance, and there's a gender-neutral washroom here. Everybody can use that, and it does have a shower in it if you were thinking about cycling to school and would like to clean up before class. There's also a wheelchair-accessible washroom right beside the gender-neutral washroom. So now, going back to the Moodle page, and again click into this section, and I'm going to talk about the roles that you play in the lab groups. So like I said, you're going to be working in a group of 3 students ideally, and everybody in the group has a certain role. So let me open up the lab manual. So this is on page 1 of the lab manual, and this outlines what the 3 roles are within your lab group. So one member of your group is going to be what's called the reader, and their job is to read over lab manual questions, lead discussions, and keep the group on track. Now, obviously, everybody in the group should be reading the question and trying to understand it, but the reader is in charge of that, so they're supposed to take a leadership role on this. The technician is in charge of setting up the equipment and coordinating with the group to take data. And again, everybody in the group is going to be helping to take data, but the technician is in charge of that process. The recorder is the person who actually logs into Moodle, opens up the lab manual file, fills it in, and then submits it for grading later. And again, everybody in the group should be talking about the questions and discussing what you're going to write down for your answer, but the recorder is the person who actually types it in and later submits the file for grading. Every week, you should cycle the roles, so if you were the recorder this week, then you should be either the reader or the technician next week. And if your group only has 2 members in it, then you'll share one of these roles between you. So in the next part of the video, I'm going to talk about how the Moodle website is structured and how you find the files you need and hand in your work. But before I jump to that, I'll just note that some useful things to bring to the labs with you every week are a scientific calculator, a pen, and some blank paper. And here we are back on the main Moodle page, and I'm going to click into the Lab 1 section. And I'll just point out that this is a little atypical for most labs because there's more than one video, so it's a bit more cluttered than you'd normally see. So I'm going to click into a more typical lab, so this one down here. So this is what you'd normally see. There'll be a video at the top, and you should watch this before the lab period starts, so I'd recommend watching it the night before. The video demonstrates how to use the equipment and how to do the experiment, so this is what prepares you to do your experiment. Then underneath the video, there'll be 3 links. The first one is to a pre-lab quiz, so this also needs to be completed before the lab period. So again, I'd recommend the night before you watch your video and you do your pre-lab quiz. Underneath the link for the pre-lab quiz, there's the link to the lab workbook for that week's experiment. So this is the file that you open up with your lab partners in the lab room, and you fill it in, and when you're happy with your work, then you're going to save this file and submit it to your lab instructor for grading. Where do you hand in your work? Well, that's this 3rd link here. So you'd click here and you'll be able to submit your work to your lab instructor. Now, another thing I'm going to note, just so you're forewarned, is that for the first 2 labs, I am going to assign you partners. And my rationale for doing this is that I want to give you a little more time to work with different people and to get to know people in your class. So for the first 2 weeks, I will assign partners. And then from lab 3 onward, I'm going to let you choose your partners. So after that, you can work with whoever you want. So now I want to show you the lab manual file. So right here is the lab manual file that you open up with your partners in the lab period, and you write up your experiment using this file. So I'll open this now. And you will need to enable editing. And then this is the file that you're going to fill in as you do your lab. So there's places where you can type stuff, and there's also diagrams where you're going to actually sketch things. And I have a separate video about how you do this, so you'll watch that later. But as I said, this file here is what you fill in with your lab partners in the lab period, and when you're done filling it out, you save this file and you submit it to your lab instructor for grading. So I'll close that down. So coming back to the Moodle site,
That's all I want to show you in this video, but I do have 2 more videos where I'm going to show you in more detail how you fill in your pre-lab quizzes and how you fill in your lab report. So watch those also, and if you have any questions about anything I've said, feel free to get in touch with me.